All right. Welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And Dr. Lisa, I think we've had a podcast before this podcast because we usually do when are we going to
Yeah,
learn to just hit record from the beginning?
I
Because
know.
we just have so many good kind of behind the scenes conversations, but we have an important one to get to today, so maybe we should just dive right in.
Yeah, let's do it.
All
All
right,
right.
let's get into the word of the week, Dr. Lisa.
Woohoo! Okay, let's do it. So, all right, I felt like I had to choose this phrase because it's very salient right now. But as many of you might know, the former FBI director James Comey was indicted again, but this time for taking a picture of seashells on a beach and posting it to his Instagram account last year, like 9 months ago or something. And the seashells were 8647. And so part of the indictment is that he was threatening to kill the president because the president is the 47th president of the United States. And so there have been lots of funny takes and memes about the likelihood that James Comey actually meant this, right? And I don't think he was even the person that put the seashells together. I think it was just on the beach and took a picture of it. But the phrase that is getting everyone in a tizzy is to 86 something. Now, when I came to the United States 20 odd years ago, I'd never heard of this. And there was a drunk driving campaign at Colorado State University that involved the term 86, and it was related to like 86 you're drinking or something. I can't remember what it was, but I never understood it. I'm like, what does 86 mean? Like, I had no clue. But I've since learned what it means. And so I was curious today to jump into where it came from. So there are a lot of origin stories for the term 86, but the most common one is that it is rhyming slang because it actually means to nix something, to throw something out, to get rid of something. And it is in the restaurant context, right? So 86 the pork chop, 86 the steak, we don't have that anymore. Cross it off the menu, right? And so so that's really what 8647 would mean is like, let's just get rid of this current president, right? It doesn't have any more nefarious overtones than that, but there are some other possible meanings, and I'm going to include a link in the show notes that had way more than I'm going to mention here. But two I wanted to bring up is one, that it might originate from the military when there were rotary phones. So when there were rotary phones, you had the number and then you had three letters underneath them. And so the 8 had a T on it and the 6 has an O on it, which is TO, standing for throw out, and was in reference to military members who had gone absent without leave, AWOL. And so to 86 then would be to throw them out of the military because of this violation, right? And then another theory that I thought was funny was back in the Old West when you had all of these folks drinking like 100 proof alcohol in the bars and they got too drunk, the bartender would reduce their drinking down to 86 proof alcohol to reduce the amount of alcohol they were drinking to slow the process of getting drunk so they would be 86th. But there is not, as far as I can tell, there's no origin story that attaches the term 86 to killing, murder, bodily harm in any way. So I don't know. I'm guessing you grew up with this term, Shaunna. It's a familiar term for you, but it's not something that's used in the UK.
Well, you know how how my escapism is into either Food Network, HGTV, or IG something. And so on Food Network or any type of restaurant type show, that was where I first heard it as well,
Okay.
was,
Yeah.
86 the pork chop, like you said, or 86 whatever, we've run out of it, or we don't have that anymore, or what have you. And so I had no idea that this was the background to this. And at the same time, we see how the landscape of our country is always looking for wherever the threat is coming from.
Right.
And so the fact that someone can be walking along, take a picture of something on the beach that they may or may not have created, and now it's considered a threat, is quite interesting to me. And at the same time, we're in a landscape where there's a lot of threats. towards this individual? Like, I would love to know, like, the percentage, because I remember when he was Senator Obama and he had the most threats of a presidential candidate in history then. And so I know somebody's keeping track of the numbers on these threats here. But it's still not uncommon for this man to have threats, whether they are true threats or manufactured threats. Let me put that in there. And so to consider this picture a threat, interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, and it's not enough even for it to be a threat, like to convict him. You have to show that he would have intended to follow through, or he was legitimately giving instructions to people to do this. But it was 8 or 9 months ago. So if it were that imminent and that much of a problem, wouldn't you have indicted and arrested him 8 or 9 months ago? Because clearly nothing has happened.
There you go.
And he's the FBI director, so it's just malicious. But I was reading something to your point, Shaunna, and I think President Obama had 11 assassination attempts while he was president. So I don't know the details. If he had that many,
if he had that many attempts, then the number of threats, goodness,
probably a lot higher. Yeah, so I'd have to dig into that. But I think Biden had two attempts. So yes, every president has it, but it's just, it's kind of grasping at straws. But I do think that what is that called? The etymology? Is that the word for the linguistic history?
Yes.
Of how the term 86 came to be was interesting.
Very, very interesting. Well, and what cracks me up about this is the logic behind, let's cut back from 100 proof alcohol to 86 proof, as if that's helping anything.
Right, I know, right? Like, well, if you're already wasted, I feel like that's not going to do a whole lot. You're right.
There you go. Now that's hilarious to me, the logic behind that. So, but that's good to know, because again, someone may inadvertently use this thinking that it's relatively innocent when they may use it in the right context or the wrong context. So I'm glad that we're going over this. Yeah. So, all right. Well, let's get into the heavy phase one.
Okay, so when I texted you the other day, Shaunna, RIP VRA, and you texted me back, ? Was that because you had not yet heard the news, or it was far too cryptic, my text?
No. I hadn't heard any news about anything, because I think by the time you texted me, I had been up early and I had like back-to-back meetings. And depending on the type of meeting, I'm not looking at my news scroll at the time. So when you sent it to me, it was like out of context and I'm uninformed. So both ends, I would say. So I was glad you said something so I could go out and check. So yeah.
Okay. So not meaning to be cryptic for our listeners, but by the time you're listening to this, it'll be a couple of weeks since this has happened. But the big news related to the VRA, so the Voting Rights Act, was that the Supreme Court released its opinion from a case it heard last year, Louisiana versus Callais, that essentially kneecapped Section 2 of the VRA. So 6-3 majority, Justice Alito wrote the majority opinion, and Justice Kagan, on behalf of Justices Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sonia Sotomayor, wrote the dissent. And there's been a lot of fallout, and we'll get to that, but I think I would like to spend some time with you, Shaunna, kind of debriefing the impact of this. So I'm just going to provide a little background here, and then let's just jump into the meat of this. So as many of you know, there were the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And the 15th Amendment, I think, was 1870. And it prohibited discrimination in voting based on race, or color, I think, national origin, previous condition of servitude. So on paper, as of this point in time, white men could not prohibit black men from voting on paper, right? Because at this point, no women had the right to vote. But as you know, as history tells us, we then had Jim Crow laws that proliferated, and there were all of these devious ways that prohibited black men and then black women from voting. And so it wasn't until 1965 that the Johnson administration, as a remedy for this generational exclusion and discrimination, passed the Voting Rights Act. And that gave the government the power to enforce, through regulations, through laws, any attempts to disenfranchise black Americans. So that didn't necessarily solve the issue, but it's definitely a watershed. And so fast forward to 1980, and there was another Supreme Court case called the City of Mobile versus Bolden. And in that court case, the Supreme Court then construed the Voting Rights Act very narrowly to only address if you could prove intent to discriminate, which, as we all know, it's really hard to prove intent, right? How do you prove intent when there's no documentation or you don't catch someone on tape saying what their intention is? So in response to that, Congress amended the Voting Rights Act, and they actually added language that said it's not just about intent, it's also about the result, as in impact, right? So even if a law or regulation is neutral on its face as regard to race, if the impact or the result is that it harms black people more, then that would be a violation of the Voting Rights Act, right? Voting Rights Act has been reauthorized multiple times, most recently in George W. Bush's administration. He was very happy to reauthorize it, right? So this is a bipartisan issue. But the Voting Rights Act has been slowly chipped away. We had Shelby County versus Holder back in 2015, I think, that undercut Section 5, and now this is about Section 2. And it basically went down, although Alito will have you believe that they were just, quote unquote, tweaking it, making some technical changes. But what they essentially did was say that you have to be able to prove intent. So they kind of bypassed the amendment to the Voting Rights Act that said, no, the result is how you can bring a case. This Supreme Court essentially said you have to prove intent, and that it's okay to gerrymander based on partisan desires, i.e. Republican versus Democrat, but it's not okay to gerrymander based on race. And as a reminder, gerrymandering is when political parties manipulate districts, congressional districts, in such a way that they have the oddest shapes, but they're trying to maximize partisan advantage. It's a peculiarly American behavior that feels just on its face anti-democratic to me. So that's the history that brings us to this point in time where the Voting Rights Act really has no teeth anymore. So so I'm wondering what your initial reaction was, Shaunna, to hearing about this news.
Again, I will probably keep saying it for the entirety of this administration. Disappointed yet not surprised on so many things. Right. Some of the first thoughts when I went out, after your message, I went out and ran and looked at the news is, do others understand this significance? Will other people be sending those 3 letters to other folks and they're immediately aware of the heavy impact that this is having on people's lives and their voices in this country, and how many years it has taken for people to have the erasure of history so flippantly with the strokes of a pen, to me, is what feels so heavy about all of this. It kind of goes back to what we talked about before with Nicole Hannah-Jones' article that she wrote for the New York Times around how this administration dismantled at least 60 years worth of civil rights activism and work within, at that time, it was about 3 or 4 months. And so the quickness with which history is being reversed and erased. And it's kind of like it, especially with the gerrymandering piece of this and what, various states are doing. It's kind of like, again, the lack of systems thinking and critical thinking is beyond me, because folks don't seem to realize that many states voted because they were trying to get their lick back, right? You had a certain partisan faction that wanted to redraw lines that we did not agree with, knowing that the intention was to redraw those lines in such a way that they are disempowering people of color specifically. And in order to get that lick back, another party said, oh, if you're going to try that, we're going to do it as well.
Yeah.
And now erasure. And so getting our lick back was a point of saying, how does it feel? How does it feel when now the shoe is on the other foot? My dad says all the time, it's no fun when the rabbit's got the gun, right? It's like the reversal of power. And now what we're saying is that history doesn't matter. History doesn't matter. And so how many seats are going to be lost, right? How many seats are going to be lost? How long will it take to then try to go back and revisit this? Because as we know, and anybody that's been a longstanding listener to this podcast knows that for the last at least 2 years, we've talked about cases that we thought were over and done.
Right.
That are no longer over and done, at least back to Roe v. Wade, Lisa, at least on this podcast.
Yeah.
So with that, when is it going to come back around? Is it going to take another 40, 50, 60 years to revisit this in such a way that we, like you always say, expand the tent? When are we going to get back to that point? So, yes, I started to sweat heavily when I saw this. Knowing yet again, this is another issue against the backdrop of everything else that's going on, including the SAVE Act conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And, this Chief Justice John Roberts has been looking to gut the Voting Rights Act since he was a White House lawyer, I think, or working in the Department of Justice. So he has had a long vendetta against it. And I guess what I didn't share is what Section 2 does. So Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act basically created wasn't a requirement so much as it was everyone in the state needs to have like equal opportunity to elect a legislator of their preference. And how that kind of emerged or evolved was that southern states in particular would redraw lines to create majority-minority districts, right? Because otherwise they would pack and crack, as the term is, and they would break up. Let's say we have, in Texas, you have Houston. It's a heavily African-American area. They would take Houston, and then they would break Houston into eighths, right? So there was just a little bit of Houston in all of these big white majority districts. And so that's what the voting rights prevented. That's what Section 2 enabled Black Americans and civil rights organizations to file a claim. And so what happened in Louisiana is that they had redrawn the map and it only had one majority minority district, and Black Americans make up about 1/3 of the state. And so there are 6 districts. And so it was found to be unconstitutional. They needed to redraw it to create a second majority minority district. They did that, and then white people sued under the Voting Rights Act, saying it was an illegal racial gerrymander. So, and so essentially that's what the court affirmed. Yes, it was an illegal racial gerrymander. And so Ibram X. Kendi, I saw a little post that he had put on Instagram about this. And he basically said what the court did was to say that majority-minority districts are unconstitutional, but majority-majority districts, so majority-white districts, are not, right? So to realign your district maps to create more political voice for Black Americans, but not just Black Americans, right? People of color who have historically been disenfranchised, that is unconstitutional. So to rectify racial discrimination in voting, the act of rectifying it via the Voting Rights Act is unconstitutional.
There you go.
So
you go. Right. And that to me seems to be, again, going back to systemic thinking and historical thinking, is why is it that I was sharing with someone, and so for the folks that are not super deeply political or any of that, Here's an example of how this works. So this has happened on many occasions in sports and other places. So let's say, now we know that we don't condone violence around here, but I'm giving this as a clear example of how this works. Lisa, I'm your bully. I'm bullying you. I'm pushing you around. You're getting sick and tired of it. And so you throw a punch at me to let me know that you're not going to stand for being pushed and bullied around. I don't get in trouble for pushing and bullying you around, but you get in trouble for throwing the punch to defend yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that seems to be the ongoing theme in this country is there are certain bullies in this country, and the person who throws the last punch always seems to be the one that's penalized. There's never a holistic view of why there is a response, why there is a correction, why there sometimes even needs to be overcorrection. And that's one thing that I am sure that the Chief Justice has never understood, because almost all of his opinions have been around, this doesn't seem fair given the current day's information without looking at it holistically and historically. Of course, if you redraw lines that are a majority minority group, that yes, on its face, that can look as if that is inappropriate and unconstitutional. But when you look at it in response to who threw the first punch, it makes sense. So how is that? So, and that's the world that he thinks in and functions in, which is why, in my opinion, he's never to be trusted. But it just seems like his thinking is always divorced from history. And the whole point of all this is to correct history.
And I think that's true of all of the, even Clarence Thomas, right? Because he was in the majority here, is that there is this kind of ahistorical reading, and it's really highly contradictory because, you know, they're all also originalists. And if you go back to the original intent of both the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment and the Voting Rights Act, they were intended to repair or address, you know, social, political, economic, cultural exclusion of Black people and formerly enslaved people. Like, that's all written everywhere, right? Like, that is well known. So it's actually kind of it's in opposition to originalist thinking decision, because they're saying the Constitution is colorblind, and that to create, to end racist practices and racist systems, we have to not take into account of race, which, to your point, and we've talked about this before, and I get it, right? Like, I understand it on a surface level, that we don't want to treat people differently based on race. Sure, that is true. However, as you and I have talked about, it's the same with women, right? That there's this long history where women have been held back, where people of color have been held back, so it's not an equal playing field. So you have to use your language, overcorrect to bring these groups up in line with white men. And that's the piece that they don't want to acknowledge, because racism is done, right? Like, that's essentially running through Alito's opinion. And to your point, when you asked the question a few minutes ago about how many seats might be lost, there are estimates that somewhere between 12 and 17 Black representatives, because there are going to be Democratic Black representatives, right? Because these redistricting will now be all about partisan advantage, right? Doesn't matter that it happens to coincide with racial identity. So we could lose up to 12 to 17 seats. Louisiana has paused its primary. People are already voting in this primary, I think, and they've paused it to redistrict to make sure their map is constitutional, right? And the other thing, I don't know if you knew this, Shaunna, but you probably did know this part. The Republican Party is a predominantly white party, right? So most legislators in the Senate and the House are white. This year, there are 4 congressional Republican representatives who are Black in the GOP. They're all leaving. So if no new Black representatives are elected for the Republican Party in this next election cycle, then come January 2027, the Republican Party in the House of Representatives will have zero Black representatives. Yeah.
None, 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 none. Oh, and that's now by design.
Yeah, right. And so then
That's
how
by
do you
design.
say that this party is representative of you? I mean,
Exactly.
there's very small racial diversity in terms of Asian or Latinx, right? Very minimal, and then there's minimal gender diversity. But
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
really, I don't know how you can look at the party and think that they know what I need when no one in there represents you. No one looks like you.
Absolutely. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Yep. By design. By design. Yeah, I just the course correction, that's what gets me about all of this is where does the correction come in? Because we've talked about this and I will continue to share how my first lesson in course correction was so eye-opening because it was my mom was talking about her lived experience with Brown versus Board. Okay. And with that, for those that aren't aware, again, we were certainly talking about specifically um, a case in 54 that basically declared that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional, right? So that whole separate but equal was not going to fly. So Plessy versus Ferguson. And so with that, again, people decide to act right when they want to act right. Prince Edward County, Virginia, where, yes, after it was declared unconstitutional to have separate but equal, there were still white folks that were very okay with putting chains on doors so
Mm-hmm.
that little Black kids could not integrate said white schools.
Right.
Now, given all of that, I know I'm taking a little bit of a rabbit trail and coming back. That case was in 1954.
Mm-hmm.
My mother in Southern Virginia, Campbell County, they were not required to, in fact, integrate until she was going into her senior year in high school, which was 1969, Lisa.
Yeah.
So the gap between 54 and 69 is just one of many examples of different areas in the country that they will only start to abide by the ruling when they're required to and forced to. Change is very difficult to proctor, especially when you have such staunch disagreement.
Yeah.
Staunch. I mean, that county is still overwhelmingly red, even to this day. And so, given that, there's a big difference between when cases come down and when people decide to abide by them. And what happens in that gap is important. And so as that change is installed, what's happening? There's a lot of people on both sides. Like my mother, imagine Lisa going through school from, pre-K all the way to 11th grade and deciding that this life-changing thing is going to happen during probably the most important year of your, secondary
Yeah.
education. You're not in a rush to integrate these white folks' school. But at the same time, you have two factions, neither of which are interested in expediting abiding by this case. And so with that, this is going to continue to happen as well as there are going to be folks that aren't interested in abiding by it. So who's going to hold people accountable for this, in fact, happening? It's going to be a slow drag. Now, I like a slow drag in this particular case because we want that
Mm-hmm.
slow drag. But where is the resistance going to come from? That's what I'll be watching moving forward,
Yeah. I mean, the
if any.
worry to you mentioned earlier about kind of the tit for tat, right? Like someone throws
Mm-hmm.
the first punch and then someone throws a bigger punch and a bigger punch and a bigger punch and so on and so forth. That's the
Mm-hmm.
concern, is that all of these southern states that have a long history of racial discrimination, so your Alabamas, Louisianas, Mississippis, Tennessees, Georgias, Florida, South
Texas.
Carolina, Texas, they're all going to redistrict, although Texas just did, right?
Yeah.
And essentially, in response to lost seats, so Democratic candidates are going to lose their seats most likely, then California is going to redistrict in such a way that like all 54 seats or however many they have in the House go Democratic, right? Or like Illinois or these big states. And so you're then just going to get into this pissing match of like, we are just going to
Yeah.
get more polarized. There are very few competitive districts right now, like I think under 20 maybe, and they're just going to go away, right? So I think almost certainly there's going to be an onslaught of legislation from the South wanting to redistrict and saying that their maps are now unconstitutional because their maps were in alignment with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, and that's now unconstitutional. So you're right. So it will be interesting. Whether this can all get done in time for the midterms remains to be seen. It will probably have a bigger impact in 2028, but it will be a big one. And it's going to disenfranchise more Black Americans. They'll still be voting, but their vote will be so diluted that they'll never be able to elect someone who represents them, because they'll be like 10% in a district and then 90% white people, right? And it'll be like that, yeah.
Well, and we said this during, we said this during the general election with Vice President Harris, is that for some groups, for those of us that understand civics and, U.S. government, there will always be a situation where, like we had previously, 92% of Black women or over 90% of Black folks still is not enough based on how these districts are drawn. So given that it could be some mathematician did this great visual where it was almost like Wolf Blitzer's magic map, where they showed even if 100% of African Americans voted in this way, it still would not be enough with this new redistricting. So understanding that that's the game that we're losing.
Yeah, because they're all going to get cracked.
Absolutely.
More than packed, they're all going to get cracked, right? The Black and Latino vote especially is going to get broken up. I did just want to read, so Justice Kagan wrote the dissent. It was actually longer than the main majority opinion, and it is a scorcher of a dissent, and may well go down in history as her most consequential, the best. It was fiery. So it's long, and I just pulled a couple of sections. So let me read you how she ends it. So this is the very end of her dissent. I dissent because the court betrays its duty to faithfully implement the great statute Congress wrote. I dissent because the court's decision will set back the foundational right Congress granted of racial equality in electoral opportunity. I dissent. Now, in Supreme Court tradition, usually people say respectfully, I dissent. There's no respectfully anywhere in this from Justice Kagan, right? And then she says, earlier in the piece, she says, I dissent. The Voting Rights Act is, or now more accurately, was one of the most consequential, efficacious, and amply justified exercises of federal legislative power in our nation's history. She's quoting from another case. It was born of the literal blood of Union soldiers and civil rights marchers. It ushered in awe-inspiring change, bringing this nation closer to fulfilling the ideals of democracy and racial equality. And it has been repeatedly and overwhelmingly reauthorized by the people's representatives in Congress. Only they have the right to say it is no longer needed, not the members of this court. I dissent, then, from this latest chapter in the majority's now completed demolition of the Voting Rights Act. So, some striking words from her.
Yeah. And what I think is so important, when you said that Kagan's dissent was longer than the majority opinion, I'm hopeful that it continues to be that way, because this is going to be our track record of history. And, when people always say, who's, you want to be on the right side of history, which I can't stand that phrase, but at the same time, which history are we talking about? Going back to, my favorite book that started my journey in this area of Lies My Teacher Told Me, James Lowen, giving the clear picture of not only the dissent, but why, and the history of what. Like every time I read one of the dissents, it's usually giving that larger systemic view that is not being considered with the majority opinions ruling. Every time.
Yep. I mean, and if this ship rights itself, then this is going to be one of the dissents that law students will read, right? It's going to be like those, Douglas or Brennan dissents from earlier Supreme Court history that are there studied because they're so important in terms of how these decisions are made. And it is, I think a lot of commentators have said how consequential this decision is. I mean, Trump versus US, that basically gave him immunity. That was what, 2024? That was a hugely consequential decision that is going to have profound ripple effects over time. And this VRA Section 2 elimination, essentially, is up there with some of the most consequential cases, like Brown versus Board of Education, but in the other direction.
There you go. Well, yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of like when I say all the time, you've got all this important stuff, but this is more importanter. I'm using my bad English.
Yeah.
This is more importanter when it comes to the seriousness of making decisions in our daily lives. It just, my God. It's
yeah.
huge.
I mean, I don't know. I say this to students all the time. The ability to vote, right, in free and fair elections is fundamental to a liberal democracy. If only some people can vote, or some people's vote counts more than others, we no longer have a representative democracy, right? Because you are manipulating the system to remove people's voices. And if people cannot elect their chosen representatives, then their voices are not represented in government, which means that policies that get made leave out those voices or actively harm those voices.
Yes.
So it is just fundamental to everything that we care about. Like Voting Rights Act feels far away, Supreme Court feels far away. It doesn't necessarily affect your day-to-day and your job, but it is so fundamental to what it means to be a democracy and how we can ensure that everyone's voices have representation, and that is just going backwards. So that's my little soapbox. Passionate.
Well, as I've always been told by my grandparents, if your vote wasn't important, they wouldn't keep fighting you for it.
Yes. Love it. Yes.
They just would, it wouldn't even come up if it wasn't important.
Yeah. That's brilliant.
So, all right. Well, with that, let's get into a little fun with phase 2. All right, Lisa, we have complained about Oscars so white. We have complained about these folks that are voting for Oscar winners that didn't even watch the freaking movie. Lisa, you remember those episodes that we've had on the Oscars, right? All right, so here we go again with some other ones, but these I think you will be supportive of, Lisa, when it comes to some new rules around Oscars. And I keep telling y'all, that AI information keeps rolling downhill towards me. I'm in the algorithm now. I can't break out. I don't know why, but I can't. But there are some new rules that are affecting Oscars and how AI can or cannot be used in consideration for awards. Okay. So there's at least 5 different rules, but there's a few others that could possibly be affected. But let's go down a few of these, Lisa, and you let me know what you think about these in particular. So AI performances flat out are banned. So only humans will be eligible for nomination in acting Oscars. Makes complete sense to me, Lisa. No AI in screenplay categories. So to qualify for writing awards, if you and I sit down and write a script, it must be a entirely human authored script, which means that they're reinforcing creative ownership. Who owns it, right? Actors can get multiple nominations, which is different. If an actor has multiple standout performances in a year, they now can receive multiple nominations. Now, this is interesting to me, not exactly AI connected, but before we hit record on this conversation, y'all, we were just talking about The Devil Wears Prada 2. And I know that Anne Hathaway has 4 or 5 films coming out this year. So let's say it rise to the level of nomination, she could get multiple nominations this year. Casting categories are expanded, so up to 3 people can now receive Oscars for casting. It used to be capped at 2 people for casting. Cinematography, that short list is locked. So the best cinematography category will now have a set short list of 20 films, which now standardizes that process when it was not that way previously.
Okay.
International film rules have now been expanded. So non-English films cannot qualify by winning major festivals like Cannes or Sundance. So with that, I think that's interesting because it kind of parlays into the next one too. International awards for directors, Oscars for international features will not be awarded to the director, will now be awarded to the director, not the country, given the creators, the creative director, more recognition than their country, which is interesting.
I didn't even know that
Um,
was a thing.
right, me either. Right. Um, and then multiple films per country are now allowed. So countries can now have more than one film nominated, opening the category to more competition. So all of this is really interesting to me that they're taking into account both how technology is evolving over time, but then also too, I'm wondering what this means for equitable acknowledgement of one's accomplishment here. I know for directors, I think that's very cool. Like, why should I be limited? Like, there, it might be a 51-49 opinion that this particular film is the best in this particular country. So why do they get to be the only ones nominated from that country?
Oh yeah. I think
I don't like
this
that.
is gonna definitely blow up the international film category because it also
Yes,
the Oscars have been so insular, right?
that's
Just kind
right.
of like
That's
navel
right.
gazing around the United States, and then if you had these rules where you could only have X number of
Mm-hmm.
international films, and the director didn't get the award, the country did, and you could limited that by country. I didn't know those rules existed, but now
Yeah.
it's going to broaden recognition for all of these other
Mm-hmm.
countries and international filmmakers. So that sounds great. Some of these I
Mm-hmm.
don't know the good or the bad of it, but I also didn't know you couldn't get multiple nominations.
It
Yeah, I didn't realize that. That seems like a stupid rule.
makes sense because, many times, let's say I'm the actor in this movie, the lead or what have you. Um, I don't get to predict when the damn movie comes out. Like, let's say
Right.
like let's say I'm an Anne Hathaway type situation where Devil Wears Prada and a couple other things come out in the same year and the timeline I didn't have control of. You mean to tell me that I can only get nominated for one because that makes no sense when I have no control of that. That feels like penalizing individuals for something that they're not in control of.
Yeah, and from an equity standpoint, when you have
That makes
fewer
sense.
women and fewer people of color, when you limit that, it reduces the
Mm-hmm.
number of opportunities for that group of people, right? Like if you're
Mm-hmm.
overrepresented, there's lots to choose from. But when you're underrepresented, there's less to choose from, making it harder perhaps for you to make the cut, even
Mm-hmm.
with the one nomination. But now opening that up, I think, is going to make a difference. And can I just say, Shauna,
Yeah,
why do
yeah.
we even need a rule to ban AI performances? To clarify that only humans can get a nomination for an acting Oscar.
Exactly.
Like
Well,
what? Like really? Oh,
oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's the thing. It's like, okay, again, thinking about the limitations of things. Like, okay, if you're talking about AI in regard to the the setting, the context, so forth, but the actual people playing the part, come on. Come on. I'm a huge fan of technology, and that's what makes a lot of movies fun. But just imagine, like, okay, Black Panther, for example. Yes, the context, all of them had to be very uh they had to be constructed using technology because some of them literally don't exist. Like, if you're talking about the ancestral plane of the Black Panthers that have passed on before us, there is no set that's going to accommodate that. So, of course, you will need to
right.
create that in some way. But I'm sure that Chadwick Boseman should not be an AI performance in front of said context, backdrop. Like, what? No, 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 no. We're not
Yeah,
doing
I
that.
mean,
We're not doing
then
that.
it's I mean, then it's an award for special effects or visual effects, right? It's not acting.
Hello.
I mean, so the only caveat I could see is if you have a film with an actor and you film most of the scenes and then that actor dies for some reason and you need 3 or 4 more scenes, and so you do that using AI or visual, I don't know, visual magic, because I know that that's happened. But then in that case, that actor that has since died, the majority of the film they acted, so I suppose they would still be awarded. But, like, you know, you couldn't say, so who's, like, a famous, like, so let's take Chadwick Boseman. Like, if we made a film now and then AI generated him, he shouldn't get an Oscar for that, right? Like, or even, I wasn't even thinking that. I was thinking, like, are you just gonna, like, make a person up, but it's not actually gonna be a real person? It's not an AI generation of a real person. It's an AI generation that's totally fictitious. Yeah.
Totally fictitious. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and even then, I mean, we've seen other movies like the Fast and the Furious movies where, you know, AI obviously was existing during some portion of those later movies, but when I forget the gentleman's name, but when he suddenly passed away, exactly to your example, the majority of the movie had been filmed, and there were some concluding scenes that his brother, who looks, I mean, they're not even twins, and it's uncanny, the similarity. They had his brother step in for those last couple of scenes, and then they wrapped it up and moved on. But to do something start to finish with, I'm just going to create a character and let that character run, and they're up for an award. Come on. I mean,
yeah,
that to me is just, but people are doing it in music. I mean, they may not be getting awarded for it, but they've been doing it in music forever. And James Earl Jones' family, I forget what it's technically called. I don't know if it's licensing or specifically trademarking, but they own their husband, father's, brother's voice so that they get to determine when it's used, but that doesn't mean it should be up for an Oscar.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's super interesting because even with the screenplay, which is right, yeah, you shouldn't be able to win something that you didn't write, but how exactly are they going to monitor that? How, you know, it's getting so good. You and I could write a screenplay through AI and pretend it was ours, and people wouldn't know. I don't think people would know.
Right. How would you know? How would you know? And that continues to be the question. How do you know that it's AI? And of course, people keep thinking that they can outsmart the people who think they can figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, it used to be easier, but it's just getting so sophisticated now in terms of the way that it communicates. Like it's not as repetitive. It's clearer, right? Outside of the hallucinations that we've talked about before. But in terms of a story, right, where we're not citing literature, right? So
That's right. Exactly. And you know, there's been the thought, because, like, you know, you're right. Thinking about movies or you know, things do happen to actors completing something that's pretty much already done, is one thing, but yeah, you know, someone's going to take it to the nth degree of the earth where they're going to do everything start to finish.
Yeah.
And then think that they can go up for an award. It's like, and I'm not saying don't get an award. I'm just saying that's not the category. Like if they created an entirely AI category for something, then get in that. But I don't think it should necessarily be that, oh, okay, here we go. Let's have AI. I don't even want to say actors, AI characters be nominated for acting awards. No, why not just have some sort of AI category or multiple categories where people can do it legit and say, yeah, this was all AI. And that in and of itself is truly a skill, but it needs to be in a different category.
Yeah. It is. This makes me think that this has already come up. AI screenplays and attempts to nominate AI fake humans. Because why else would they, like, I don't think they're that far ahead of the game that they're, like, thinking about this and done it. This is in response to something, I would guess.
There you go. Exactly. So I'm like, this is interesting. We're going to see how this goes. But I'm at least glad that they're reviewing their rules to stay up with the times of things. I'm not sure. I would be interested. This is a governance thing. I would be interested to know how frequently they do this
Yeah, yeah,
when it comes to updating their rules. Um, like the ones we've talked about before, Lisa, where we were shocked that the rule wasn't in place. Like,
yeah,
excuse me, I can't vote for a movie that I didn't watch. Common sense would tell
yeah,
you
yeah.
watch the freaking movie. It just to me, I just found that so hilarious. Like, really, y'all?
I know.
Yeah, unbelievable. So, with that, I just wanted to offer that up because you and I complain about
Hmm.
Oscars on a regular basis. And I thought, ooh, this is really intriguing. Some of these are very good things. And
Yeah,
trying to keep up with the times. And it kind of reminds me, too. I know we weren't explicitly talking about Devil Wears Prada 2 in this one, but they were talking about how to keep up with the times as well throughout that
they
movie with
were.
technology.
Yeah,
And so I was like,
yeah.
ooh, this is an
Uh-huh.
interesting connection here that I wasn't anticipating. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Uh, all right. Well, look, we've talked about the heavy and the light in this particular
Yes.
episode,
Yes.
y'all. So we hope you enjoyed it. That's a wrap on this week's episode of Unfazed Unedited. Don't forget, you can reach us on all your social media and podcast apps at Unfazed Unedited. Email us at info@unfazedpodcast.com or just go to our website, unfazedpodcast.com, where you can access our new and old shows. So if you like this week's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, or just share it with your friends, coworkers, or others in this phase of your life. So, Dr. Lisa, until next week.
All right. I will see you next week.